He slept without clothes, and woke claimed by a wild frontier girl, emotional Wild West story. There were no towns nearby, only the endless plains, scattered trees, and the occasional rocky hill that rose stubbornly from the flat earth. Ethan's journey had been long, and every mile seemed heavier than the last. He felt the heat pressing down on him, the dry wind scratching his skin, and the dust that clung to his clothes and hair. All he wanted was rest, even if it meant lying on the hard ground under the open sky. Finally, he spotted a small creek winding quietly through the landscape, its water sparkling in the late afternoon sun. It promised coolness, relief, and a chance to rest both his body and mind. He urged his horse toward the water, feeling a surge of relief as the animal slowed and finally stopped at the creek's edge. Ethan dismounted carefully, rubbing his stiff legs and shoulders, and looked around. The spot was perfect, secluded, quiet, and far from the main trail. He could see no one around for miles. Here, he could finally be alone. Ethan set about making a small camp. He gathered some dry wood to make a fire and checked the water to make sure it was safe to drink. The quiet of the frontier surrounded him. He could hear the gentle babble of the creek, the rustling of the leaves, and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. For the first time in days, he felt a small measure of peace. The world, so vast and untamed, seemed to pause just for him. After a while, feeling the weight of travel and the heat of the day, Ethan made a bold decision. He wanted to feel the freedom of the open land fully, without anything to bind him. Slowly, he removed his dusty clothes and set them carefully on a nearby rock. Standing there in the warm sunlight, he felt the breeze against his bare skin, cool and refreshing. It was a strange sensation, unlike anything he had felt before in the confinement of towns, inns, and crowded trails. He lay down on the soft grass by the creek, letting the warmth of the earth seep into him and the sound of flowing water lull him toward sleep. The wilderness seemed to wrap around him like a blanket. Birds chirped softly in the trees, and small creatures scurried through the grass. Ethan's mind began to wander, thinking of the journey that had brought him here. He had left behind everything familiar, a small, dusty town where everyone knew each other's business, the smell of freshly baked bread from his family's bakery, the comfort of a simple, ordinary life. Out here, he was free. Free from rules, free from expectations, and free from the weight of the past. He felt lighter, almost like he was becoming part of the wild land itself. Unbeknownst to Ethan, he was not entirely alone. From the edge of the nearby woods, a pair of sharp, curious eyes watched him. Leela, a young girl of the frontier, had grown up in the wild, surviving on her own for years. She moved silently among the trees, her bare feet making almost no sound on the soft earth. She was fearless, cunning, and deeply connected to the land, understanding its moods and its dangers. She had seen travelers before, but none like this one. There was something different about him, vulnerable yet unafraid, and somehow completely at ease in a way she found fascinating. Leela stayed hidden, watching as Ethan stretched on the grass, letting the sunlight warm him. She had always been cautious around strangers, especially men, but there was no danger in him that she could sense. Instead, she felt curiosity and, oddly, a sense of admiration. He seemed so natural in the wilderness, as if he belonged to it just as much as she did. Her eyes traced his movements, noting how he cared for his small camp, how he treated the creek water with respect, and how he seemed to breathe in the life around him. It was unusual, and it made her want to learn more about him. Time passed slowly. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, painting the clouds with shades of gold and orange. Ethan lay still, half asleep, half lost in thought. He had traveled far and faced many challenges, but this moment of peace felt new and precious. He thought about the miles he had ridden, the dust he had swallowed, and the loneliness he had carried. For the first time, he felt that perhaps the journey wasn't just about moving from one place to another. It was about moments like this, when he could feel completely free and connected to the world around him. As the evening approached, Ethan finally sat up and rubbed his eyes. The sky had turned a deep shade of purple, and the first stars began to appear. He realized he had been lying there much longer than he intended. The cool air of the night began to settle over the land, and he shivered slightly. He looked around, suddenly aware of the vastness of the wilderness and the isolation it brought. The beauty of the land was undeniable, but it could also be harsh and unforgiving. He needed to be cautious, even as he enjoyed the rare feeling of total freedom. Meanwhile, Leela moved a little closer, hidden behind a cluster of rocks and shrubs. She studied Ethan with keen interest. She had seen travelers before, but few displayed such a mix of recklessness and care, vulnerability and strength. She wondered who he was, why he was out here alone, and what brought him to her part of the frontier. There was a quiet intensity about him that made her heart beat faster. She had learned to trust her instincts in the wilderness, and her instinct now told her that this man was different. He was not a threat, but he was also someone whose presence would change things. As night fell, Ethan decided it was time to sleep properly. He lay down again, covering himself with a small blanket he had packed. The sounds of the night became more pronounced: the hoot of an owl, the distant howl of a wolf, the rustling of leaves as the wind picked up. He felt both small and alive in the great expanse of the frontier. He thought of the towns he had left behind, the people he had known, and the predictable life he had abandoned. Here, in the open land with only the stars for company, he felt a sense of possibility he had never known before. Leela continued to watch, her mind filled with questions. She had never approached someone so boldly vulnerable before, especially not in her territory. Part of her wanted to leave and let him remain alone, respecting his privacy. But another part, the part that had been lonely for so long in the wild, wanted to see him up close, to understand the person who seemed both fearless and fragile at the same time. She decided to wait a little longer, curious about what the night would bring. Ethan drifted into sleep, unaware of the watchful eyes. The stars twinkled above, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The creek murmured softly, and the trees whispered in the gentle breeze. It was a night of quiet magic, of solitude and freedom, a night that would mark the beginning of a story neither Ethan nor Leela could have predicted. In the vast wilderness of the frontier, two lives were about to intersect in a way that would change them forever. By the time the moon rose high in the sky, Ethan was deep in dreams, and Leela still observed him, captivated by the stranger who had dared to lie naked beneath the stars. She felt a strange pull, a mix of curiosity, caution, and something she couldn't yet name. The night stretched on, carrying with it the promise of an encounter that neither would forget, a meeting born of courage, vulnerability, and the untamed spirit of the Wild West. Morning came slowly over the vast frontier. The first rays of sunlight touched the land, turning the grass golden and sparkling along the edges of the creek where Ethan had slept. He stirred, stretching his arms and feeling the cool morning air on his skin. His body ached from the long journey and the rough ground he had slept on, but he also felt strangely refreshed. The night had been quiet, except for the gentle sounds of the wilderness, the creek's flowing water, birds calling from the trees, and the distant rustle of small animals in the underbrush. As Ethan opened his eyes fully, he realized something that made him freeze for a moment. He was completely exposed. The blankets he had used for comfort during the night had slipped to the side, and he was fully aware of his vulnerability in the wide-open land. A mix of embarrassment and surprise ran through him, and he quickly grabbed his clothes, pulling them over his body as fast as he could. He had spent years traveling alone, used to the hardships of the frontier, but being caught in such a situation was new and unnerving. From her hiding spot, Leela had already moved closer, her eyes studying Ethan without making a sound. She had been curious the night before, but now, In the full light of day, her fascination deepened. The man's reaction to waking alone in the wilderness intrigued her. He was flustered, but he also moved with purpose and self-respect. Leela felt a strange mix of amusement and admiration. She had seen many travelers in her territory, but few had been so exposed, vulnerable, and yet so completely themselves. She stepped quietly from the shadows, careful not to startle him. Ethan caught sight of movement out of the corner of his eye and froze again, unsure if he was imagining it. Slowly, he turned and saw a young girl stepping out from behind a cluster of rocks. Her clothes were simple and practical, suited for life in the wild, and her hair fell freely around her shoulders. Her eyes were sharp and confident, yet there was a spark of curiosity and warmth that caught him off guard. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them was filled with a strange tension, a mix of caution, curiosity, and something neither had expected. Finally, Leela spoke, her voice calm but firm. "You can't just lie here alone like that. It's dangerous." Ethan nodded, still gathering his thoughts and trying to mask his embarrassment. "I know. I didn't expect anyone to be near," he said, his voice a little shaky but sincere. He noticed the way she studied him, her eyes assessing every movement. "I didn't mean any trouble," he added quickly. Leela's expression softened slightly, though she didn't step closer just yet. "It's not about trouble," she said. "It's about surviving. Out here, being careless can get you hurt." As they began to talk, Ethan learned more about Leela. She was a girl of the wilderness, independent and resourceful, shaped by years of surviving alone after losing her family. She moved through the land as easily as if she belonged to it entirely. Ethan, who had traveled far from towns and farms, found himself fascinated by her strength and self-sufficiency. He realized that here, in the untamed frontier, survival required more than courage. It required intelligence, intuition, and an understanding of the land itself. Leela seemed to possess all of these qualities in abundance. Despite the initial awkwardness, the conversation began to flow naturally. Ethan explained why he had been traveling alone, seeking freedom and a new beginning far from the predictable routines of town life. He spoke of the challenges he had faced on the trail, the loneliness that sometimes weighed heavily on him, and the beauty he had discovered in the endless landscapes. Leela listened with careful attention, occasionally nodding or asking questions that revealed her sharp mind and awareness of the world. She shared some of her own experiences, though sparingly, revealing just enough to show her resilience and independence without giving away all her secrets. After a while, Leela decided that Ethan could not remain exposed in the wild, no matter how strong or capable he seemed. She gestured toward the creek. "You should at least wash up and put some clothes on," she said, indicating that she had noticed his hastily dressed state. Ethan agreed, grateful for her guidance. He walked to the water and splashed it over his face, feeling the coolness wash away the remnants of dust and sleep. Leela watched silently, her presence both comforting and slightly intimidating. There was something in the way she moved and observed that made Ethan feel both protected and alert at the same time. As the morning progressed, Leela led Ethan to a small, sheltered area not far from the creek. It was a safe place to rest, hidden from the main trail and surrounded by trees that offered shade. Along the way, she pointed out signs of wildlife, areas where water could be found, and spots to avoid because of predators. Ethan was impressed by her knowledge and careful attention to detail. He realized that surviving in the wilderness was not just about physical strength. It was about awareness, patience, and respect for the land. Leela had all of these qualities in abundance, and he found himself quietly admiring her for it. By late morning, they settled in a shaded clearing. Ethan felt a mix of relief and curiosity. He had expected solitude, but now he had someone to share this quiet, wild place with, even if only briefly. Leela sat nearby, watching him carefully but without intrusion. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the natural sounds of the frontier, the wind through the leaves, birds calling overhead, and the gentle rush of the creek. For Ethan, this was a new kind of companionship, one that did not rely on words alone but on shared space and mutual respect. During a break in their conversation, Leela decided to test Ethan's understanding of the land. She asked him to spot signs of animals, to notice changes in the wind, and to predict where the water would be safest to drink. Ethan tried his best, though he quickly realized how little he knew about true survival in the wilderness. Leela's eyes sparkled with a mixture of challenge and amusement. "You have a lot to learn," she said, smiling slightly. Ethan nodded, accepting her guidance with humility. It was rare for him to meet someone who could teach him so much without seeming harsh or judgmental. As the day wore on, they shared more stories about themselves. Ethan spoke of the towns he had visited, the people he had met, and the lessons he had learned on the trail. Layla, in turn, spoke of the hardships she had faced and the ways she had adapted to survive. She told him about the storms she had weathered, the winters she had endured alone, and the ways she had learned to trust her instincts. Ethan listened intently, fascinated by her courage and determination. In turn, he shared some of his own fears and hopes, and for the first time in a long while, he felt understood. As afternoon turned to evening, Ethan realized how much time had passed since he had woken. The sun was lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the land. Leela suggested they prepare for the night, and together they gathered wood for a fire. The process was quiet but cooperative. Ethan began to understand the rhythm of life in the wilderness, small tasks that mattered, moments of attention and care, and the importance of working together even with someone new. The fire once lit cast a warm glow over their camp, and for a moment the frontier felt less lonely, less harsh, and more like a place where connections could be made. As night fell, the temperature dropped, and Ethan felt the chill of the open plains. Leela shared a blanket with him, a practical gesture that was also surprisingly comforting. They sat near the fire, the glow highlighting the determination and curiosity in their faces. Words were few, but the sense of trust between them grew. Ethan realized that this encounter, which had begun with embarrassment and vulnerability, was transforming into something more profound, a connection born of respect, shared experiences, and the unspoken understanding of the wild land around them. Finally, as the stars began to appear overhead, Ethan leaned back against a tree and looked at the sky. The vastness of the frontier stretched endlessly above him, yet he no longer felt entirely alone. Leela sat nearby, a silent presence that was at once protective and intriguing. He realized that meeting her had changed the way he viewed this journey. The wilderness was still vast and untamed, but it was also full of unexpected companionship and lessons waiting to be learned. For the first time, he felt that perhaps the frontier was not just a place to survive, but a place to truly live. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the vast frontier, painting the sky with soft pinks and oranges. Ethan awoke feeling the chill of dawn, his body stiff from sleeping on the uneven ground. Beside him, Leela stirred as well, her movements as fluid and natural as the wildlife around them. The day promised another challenge. Life in the wilderness was never easy, but for the first time, Ethan felt that he wasn't entirely alone. He had someone to rely on, someone who understood the dangers and beauty of the land in a way he had never experienced before. Leela rose first, moving silently to the creek to fetch water. Her bare feet made no sound on the soft grass, and Ethan watched her, impressed by her confidence and grace. She had grown up in this wilderness, and it showed in every action she took. Ethan, by contrast, was still learning the rhythms of survival, but he was eager and determined. He wanted to prove that he could handle the challenges of the frontier, not just for himself, but to earn the respect of Leela, who had been living in this untamed land for years. After a quick breakfast of dried meat and berries that Leela had gathered the day before, they set out on a short journey through the surrounding area. Leela had promised to teach Ethan more about the land, and he was ready to learn. She showed him how to read the tracks of animals in the dirt, how to notice subtle changes in the wind that could signal approaching weather, and how to find safe drinking water. Ethan listened intently, asking questions and observing carefully. He realized that surviving here required more than strength. It required attention, patience, and respect for the world around him. As they moved deeper into the wilderness, Leela shared stories of her life. She had been alone for years, learning to survive after losing her family to disease and hardship. The frontier had taken much from her, but it had also made her strong, resourceful, and independent. She had learned to hunt, fish, and navigate the land with skill and confidence. Ethan listened, fascinated by her experiences. He admired her resilience and courage, recognizing in her a spirit that matched the untamed land itself. For the first time, he felt a deep sense of admiration for someone he had just met. Their journey was not without challenges. At one point, they encountered a steep hill with loose rocks. Ethan slipped, scraping his hand on a sharp stone, and Leela quickly reached out to steady him. "Be careful," she said, her voice calm but firm. "The land doesn't forgive mistakes." Ethan nodded, feeling both embarrassed and grateful. He realized that, though he had traveled far and faced many dangers, the frontier demanded constant awareness. Leela's guidance was invaluable, and he was learning more than he had ever known about survival in just a single day. After reaching a small plateau overlooking the valley below, they paused to rest. Ethan marveled at the view, the rolling hills, the distant mountains, and the winding river that caught the sunlight like a ribbon of silver. Leela sat beside him, her eyes scanning the horizon. "This land can be beautiful," she said softly, "but it can also be cruel. You have to respect it, or it will teach you lessons you don't want to learn." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had come seeking freedom and adventure, but he was beginning to understand that true freedom required responsibility and understanding. As they prepared to descend into the valley, Leela decided it was time to teach Ethan some basic hunting skills. She showed him how to track small animals, how to move silently through the underbrush, and how to use a simple trap to catch food. Ethan struggled at first, fumbling with the tools and making mistakes, but Leela's patience never wavered. "Everyone starts somewhere," she said, smiling. "You'll get better with practice." Ethan appreciated her encouragement, feeling a growing bond between them. He realized that surviving in the wilderness was not just about physical skill, but also about learning from others and trusting their guidance. By midday, they had successfully caught enough small game to prepare a modest meal. Leela taught Ethan how to clean and cook the meat over an open fire, using techniques she had perfected over the years. The aroma of cooking food filled the air, mixing with the scent of the grass and trees around them. Ethan felt a sense of accomplishment he had rarely experienced before. He was beginning to understand the rhythms of life in the wilderness, the work, the challenges, and the rewards. And through it all, Leela remained a steady guide, offering wisdom, encouragement, and the occasional teasing remark that made him laugh. As they ate, they talked more about their hopes and dreams. Ethan shared his desire to see the world, to experience life beyond the confines of towns and farms, and to find a place where he truly belonged. Leela spoke of her wish to continue living in the wilderness, to remain free and independent, but also admitted, quietly, that she had longed for companionship in her solitary life. Their conversation was honest and open, revealing a growing emotional connection. They began to realize that, despite their different experiences, they shared common values, courage, independence, and a deep respect for the natural world. After the meal, they continued exploring the valley. Leela taught Ethan how to identify edible plants, how to avoid dangerous ones, and how to navigate using the sun and landmarks. They discovered a small cave that could provide shelter in case of bad weather, and Ethan marveled at how resourceful and prepared Leela was. Her knowledge of the land was extensive, and he felt both impressed and humbled. For every skill he had learned in towns or from traveling, she had skills honed by necessity and experience, shaped by years of surviving in the wilderness. As evening approached, dark clouds began to gather on the horizon. Leela's sharp eyes noticed the change immediately. "We should head back to camp," she said, her tone serious. Ethan nodded, realizing that storms in the frontier could be dangerous and unpredictable. They moved quickly but carefully, navigating the rocky terrain and dense underbrush. Soon, the first drops of rain began to fall, and the wind picked up. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed by the rumble of thunder. Ethan felt a mix of excitement and fear. This was the wild land in all its power, and he was experiencing it fully for the first time. They reached their camp just as the rain began to fall in earnest. Leela quickly gathered wood to strengthen their fire and prepared a makeshift shelter using blankets and branches. Ethan helped as best as he could, learning from her efficiency and resourcefulness. They worked in silence, the storm surrounding them with its loud roar and the cold wind driving the rain into their clothes. When the shelter was ready, they huddled together under it, sharing warmth and comfort as the storm raged around them. Ethan realized how much he relied on Leela's knowledge and calm presence. Without her, he would have struggled to survive the storm. The night was long and wet, but the storm eventually passed, leaving the world fresh and renewed. Ethan and Leela sat by the fire, drying their clothes and sharing quiet conversation. The storm had brought them closer, not just as companions but as partners in facing the challenges of the wilderness. Ethan felt a sense of trust and respect for Leela that went beyond admiration. He felt a growing bond, one rooted in shared experience, mutual reliance, and the understanding that they could face anything together. As the stars reappeared in the clear night sky, Ethan looked at Leela and realized that this journey was changing him. He had come seeking freedom and adventure, but he had found something more profound, a connection with someone who understood the land, the challenges of survival, and the value of trust. Leela, too, felt a shift within herself. She had been cautious and solitary for so long, but Ethan's presence brought warmth, curiosity, and the possibility of companionship she had not expected. That night, as they lay near the fire under the stars, Ethan thought about how far he had come, not just in distance, but in understanding. He had learned that survival in the wilderness required skill, patience, and respect, but also trust, courage, and connection. Leela had become his guide, his teacher, and in ways he was only beginning to understand, a companion. The frontier was vast and unpredictable, but for the first time, Ethan felt that he had someone by his side who could help him navigate it, not just the land, but life itself. And so, the day ended with a quiet sense of accomplishment, growth, and connection. Ethan had survived the storm, learned new skills, and forged a bond with Leela that promised to grow stronger with each passing day. The wilderness around them was still wild and untamed, but it had also become a place of learning, discovery, and shared experience. For both of them, this was only the beginning of a journey that would test their courage, strengthen their bond, and reveal the depths of their resilience in the face of the unforgiving frontier. The following days passed with a mix of routine and adventure. Ethan and Leela had grown more comfortable with each other, their bond strengthened by shared experiences in the wilderness. They rose with the sun, hunted, gathered, and explored the rugged land around their camp. Ethan was learning quickly, his confidence growing with each new skill Leela taught him. He had come to admire her not only for her survival abilities, but also for her quiet strength and sharp mind. Leela, in turn, began to appreciate Ethan's determination, curiosity, and willingness to learn. traits that reminded her that not all travelers were careless or self-centered. One morning, while Ethan was gathering firewood near the edge of the forest, Leela spotted smoke rising in the distance. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the horizon. "Someone's coming," she said, her voice tense. Ethan approached, noticing her sudden seriousness. He had come to trust her instincts. They were usually right. Leela explained that travelers and settlers occasionally pass through these lands, but they could be unpredictable. Some were harmless, seeking only a place to rest, while others could bring trouble, especially if they didn't respect the rules of the frontier. As they watched, a small group of men appeared on the ridge, riding horses and carrying supplies. Leela studied them carefully. "They're settlers," she said cautiously, "but I don't know if they're friendly. We need to be careful." Ethan felt a twinge of anxiety. He had grown used to the solitude and freedom of the wilderness, but the presence of outsiders reminded him that the frontier could be dangerous in unexpected ways. Leela decided they should observe from a distance first, ensuring that they could act quickly if the situation turned threatening. The settlers eventually descended into a nearby valley, setting up a temporary camp. From their vantage point, Ethan and Leela could see that the newcomers were cautious but curious. Leela frowned. "They might come looking for us if they see our camp," she warned. Ethan understood immediately. The last thing he wanted was trouble, especially with Leela, whose life depended on her knowledge and careful navigation of the land. He realized that the wilderness, while beautiful and freeing, was also filled with rules that had to be respected. Over the next few days, tension grew as the settlers remained in the valley. Ethan and Leela kept to themselves, moving quietly and avoiding detection. Despite the caution, Ethan began to notice that Leela seemed more protective than usual. She guided him away from open areas, kept a watchful eye on the skies, and reminded him to stay alert at all times. Ethan admired her vigilance and felt a growing respect for the way she balanced caution with confidence. Her ability to anticipate danger, even from people, reminded him that survival in the wilderness was not just about skills, but also about judgment and awareness. The presence of the settlers also stirred feelings in Ethan that he hadn't expected. He realized that he had grown attached to this life with Leela, not just the freedom and adventure, but the companionship, the shared understanding, and the sense of trust that had developed between them. The thought of losing that connection frightened him. He had traveled alone for so long, and now the idea of leaving or being separated from Leela felt unbearable. Yet he also knew that his past responsibilities and obligations could catch up with him at any moment. He faced a difficult choice: stay with Leela and the wilderness or return to the world he had left behind. Leela noticed Ethan's change in mood but did not push him to explain. She knew that travelers often carried burdens and decisions that could weigh heavily on them. Instead, she focused on teaching him more survival skills and sharing stories from her own past. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she spoke about the challenges she had faced after losing her family. She described the loneliness, the fear, and the courage it had taken to survive. Ethan listened intently, realizing that her strength came not only from skill, but also from resilience and determination. Her experiences gave him perspective on his own life and the choices he faced. The next day, a messenger arrived unexpectedly at the edge of the settlers' camp. Ethan recognized the man from a town he had passed weeks earlier. The messenger carried urgent news. Trouble in a nearby settlement required Ethan's attention. His past had caught up with him. The news brought a wave of anxiety and conflict. Ethan wanted to help, to honor obligations from his previous life, but he also feared leaving Leela alone in the wilderness. The decision weighed heavily on him, and he felt torn between two worlds: the life he had known and the life he was beginning to build with Leela. Leela sensed his inner conflict and approached him quietly. "You have a choice to make," she said softly. I won't tell you what to do, but you need to decide." Ethan looked at her, seeing concern and understanding in her eyes. He realized that she valued his autonomy and respected his decisions, even as she cared deeply about his presence in her life. Her words gave him clarity, reminding him that the choices he made were his own, and that the right decision would come from careful thought, not from fear or obligation. As the day wore on, Ethan weighed his options. He could leave to address the troubles in the settlement, risking separation from Leela and the life they had started to build together. Or he could stay, embracing the unknown challenges of the wilderness with Leela by his side. The decision was not easy. He reflected on the journey that had brought him here, the loneliness, the lessons, the dangers, and the bond he had formed with Leela. He realized that the wilderness had taught him more about life and himself than any town or settlement ever could. Finally, as the sun began to set, Ethan made his choice. He turned to Leela, his expression resolute. "I've decided," he said. "I want to stay with you." Leela's eyes softened, a mixture of relief and happiness shining in them. "Then we face the frontier together," she replied. The words carried a promise, a commitment to face challenges side by side, no matter what obstacles might come. Ethan felt a sense of peace and determination he had not felt in years. He understood that true partnership required courage, trust, and the willingness to face uncertainty together. The following days were filled with preparation and planning. Ethan and Leela worked together to reinforce their camp, gather supplies, and map out areas for exploration and hunting. The presence of the settlers remained a distant concern, but they had chosen to focus on each other and their shared life in the wilderness. The emotional bond between them continued to deepen. They shared laughter, stories, and quiet moments of reflection by the fire. Each day, they learned more about each other, discovering strengths, fears, and dreams that strengthened their connection. One afternoon, while exploring a nearby grove, they encountered signs of wild animals. A herd of deer moving through the trees, tracks of a bear near the creek, and birds fleeing overhead. Leela used the opportunity to teach Ethan about tracking and observation, explaining how each detail could signal danger or opportunity. Ethan followed her instructions carefully, impressed by her attention to detail and the ease with which she moved through the wilderness. He realized that survival required more than physical skill. It required awareness, patience, and a deep understanding of the natural world. As evening approached, they returned to their camp, tired but satisfied. They built a fire and shared a simple meal, enjoying the warmth and comfort of each other's presence. Ethan felt a profound sense of belonging. He had come seeking freedom and adventure, but he had found something more: trust, companionship, and the beginnings of love rooted in respect and shared experiences. Leela, too, felt a growing warmth in her heart. She had always been independent, wary of outsiders, but Ethan's presence had introduced something new, a sense of connection that was both comforting and exhilarating. That night, as they sat beneath the stars, Ethan reflected on the choices he had made. He understood that life in the wilderness was unpredictable, filled with challenges that would test their courage and resilience. Yet he felt confident that, together, he and Leela could face whatever came their way. They had chosen each other, chosen trust, and chosen to embrace the untamed life of the frontier. The stars above seemed to shine brighter, reflecting the hope and determination in their hearts. And so, Part 4 ended with a mixture of tension, choice, and resolution. Ethan and Leela had faced the challenge of external threats and internal doubts, navigating the complexities of their lives and emotions with care and courage. The wilderness remained wild and unforgiving, but their bond had become a source of strength. They had chosen to face the unknown together, ready for the adventures, trials, and joys that lay ahead. Their story was far from over, but the foundation had been laid, a partnership rooted in trust, respect, and the enduring spirit of the frontier. The morning sun rose over the frontier, casting golden light across the rugged hills and sparkling creek where Ethan and Leela had made their home. The air was fresh and filled with the sounds of life, the birds singing, the leaves rustling in the gentle breeze, and the water flowing steadily over the rocks. For Ethan, each day in the wilderness had brought new challenges, lessons, and a growing understanding of the land. Yet more importantly, it had brought him closer to Leela, whose strength, wisdom, and courage had become a guiding force in his life. The previous days had been filled with work, learning, and survival, but this morning there was a sense of calm, almost as if the land itself was acknowledging the bond that had grown between them. Ethan stirred, stretching his limbs and feeling the warmth of the sun on his skin. Leela was already awake, moving quietly to the creek to collect fresh water. He watched her for a moment, marveling at her ease and confidence. She seemed perfectly at home in the wilderness, yet there was a softness in her movements when she thought no one was watching. As Ethan approached, Leela smiled. "Morning," she said, her voice gentle but lively. "Ready for a day of work?" Ethan nodded, feeling a mix of determination and comfort. He had come to understand that life in the wilderness was not just about survival. It was about balance, patience, and shared responsibility. Together, they had learned to hunt, gather, and navigate the rugged terrain. They had faced storms, wild animals, and the uncertainty of outsiders encroaching on their space. Each challenge had tested them, but it had also strengthened their bond. After breakfast, they set out to explore a section of the valley they had not yet visited. Leela led the way, her eyes scanning for signs of animals and hidden dangers. Ethan followed closely, absorbing every detail and instruction. He noticed how effortlessly she moved, how she read the land with a careful, intuitive eye. "You're improving," Leela said, glancing back at him with a hint of pride. "You're learning to see what the land wants you to see." Ethan smiled, feeling a surge of confidence. He realized that he had come far, not just in miles but in skill and understanding. As they walked, they came across a patch of wild berries. Leela knelt to examine them, teaching Ethan how to identify which ones were safe to eat. "The land provides," she said softly. "But you have to know how to take only what you need." Ethan listened carefully, marveling at her knowledge and the respect she had for every living thing around her. He realized that survival in the wilderness was not just about physical strength. It was about harmony, awareness, and understanding the world on its own terms. Later in the day, they reached a small clearing where the sun shone brightly and the wind moved gently through the grass. Ethan took a moment to sit and look around. The beauty of the frontier was breathtaking, yet he also felt a profound sense of responsibility. Life here was raw and real, full of challenges that could not be ignored. Leela joined him, sitting quietly and watching him with a thoughtful expression. "You've changed," she said softly. "You're not just the traveler who came here. You're someone who belongs to this land now, in your own way." Ethan felt a warmth in his chest, knowing that her words carried truth, respect, and a deep emotional connection. As the afternoon passed, they decided to hunt for deer, hoping to gather enough food for the coming days. Leela taught Ethan how to track footprints, observe subtle signs, and move silently through the underbrush. Ethan followed her guidance closely, careful not to disturb the animals or make mistakes. They worked as a team, communicating with gestures and glances, each understanding the other's intentions without needing words. The hunt was successful, and they returned to their camp with enough food to sustain them. That evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of pink, orange, and purple, Ethan and Leela sat by the fire, cooking the deer they had caught. The warmth of the flames, combined with the satisfaction of their work, brought a sense of peace and contentment. Ethan felt a deep gratitude for Leela, whose knowledge, patience, and companionship had transformed his experience of the wilderness. He realized that their bond had grown beyond survival and trust. It was now something deeper, a connection born of shared challenges, mutual respect, and genuine care. As darkness fell and the stars appeared overhead, Ethan decided to speak from his heart. "Leela," he began, his voice soft but steady, "I came here searching for freedom, adventure, and perhaps a new life. I found all of that, but more importantly, I found you. You've taught me so much, not just about the land, but about courage, trust, and love. I don't want to go back to the world I left behind. I want to stay here with you and face whatever comes our way together." Leela's eyes glistened in the firelight, and a gentle smile curved her lips. She had spent years alone, learning to rely only on herself, and the thought of opening her life to someone else had always seemed risky. But Ethan's words, his sincerity, and his willingness to embrace the wilderness alongside her touched her deeply. "Ethan," she replied softly, "I've been alone for so long that I forgot what it feels like to share life with someone, but I feel it now with you. I want to face the frontier together, side by side, no matter what comes." The moment was quiet and intimate, filled with the sounds of the night, the whisper of the wind through the trees, the distant call of an owl, and the gentle flow of the creek nearby. They sat together, hands brushing, hearts connected, feeling a profound sense of trust, understanding, and love. The wilderness around them, once a place of isolation and challenge, had become a space of possibility, companionship, and hope. In the days that followed, Ethan and Leela worked together to strengthen their home in the wilderness. They built a more secure shelter, created a small garden, and explored further areas of the valley. Every task, whether mundane or challenging, became a shared experience that reinforced their bond. They laughed, learned, and sometimes struggled, but always together. The frontier remained wild and unpredictable, yet their partnership brought a sense of stability, resilience, and joy. One morning, while exploring a hidden grove, they discovered a small waterfall cascading into a crystal-clear pool. Ethan marveled at the sight, feeling a sense of wonder and gratitude for the beauty of the land and the life they were building together. Leela smiled, watching his reaction. "This place is special," she said. "It reminds me that the wilderness isn't just about survival. It's about finding the moments that make life worth living." Ethan nodded, realizing that she was right. The frontier had taught him lessons he could not have learned elsewhere, lessons of patience, courage, trust, and the deep value of connection. As weeks turned into months, Ethan and Leela continued to thrive in their shared life. They faced storms, wildlife, and the occasional encounter with travelers, but they did so together, supporting each other with skill, courage, and love. Their bond deepened with each challenge, each shared experience, and each quiet moment beneath the stars. The wilderness, once a place of solitude and danger, had become a canvas for their partnership, a space where trust, respect, and companionship could flourish. One evening, as they sat by their fire under the vast night sky, Ethan reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had come searching for freedom, expecting only solitude and adventure, but he had found something far greater, a life shared with someone who understood him, challenged him, and inspired him. Leela had taught him that true freedom was not merely the absence of constraints, but the ability to face life's challenges together, with courage, trust, and love. Leela, too, felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had spent years surviving alone, believing that reliance on anyone else was a weakness. But Ethan had shown her that companionship did not diminish strength, it enhanced it. Together, they had built a life in the wilderness that was full of adventure, learning, and emotional connection. They had chosen each other, and in doing so, they had created a shared world where both could thrive. As the fire crackled and the stars twinkled overhead, Ethan reached for Leela's hand. "We've come far," he said softly, "and yet I feel like this is only the beginning. No matter what the future holds, I want to face it with you. Leela squeezed his hand gently, her eyes reflecting the light of the flames and the depth of her feelings. "Together," she agreed. "Whatever comes, we face it together." The night stretched on, peaceful and full of promise. The wilderness around them remained wild, unpredictable, and alive, yet within their camp there was warmth, trust, and a sense of belonging. Ethan and Leela had faced challenges, made difficult choices, and discovered the strength of their bond. Now, they were ready to embrace the future, confident in their partnership and the life they had built in the untamed frontier. And so, their story reached a satisfying and emotional conclusion. The frontier remained vast and wild, but Ethan and Leela had found not only survival but a shared life, love, and hope. They had learned that true freedom and adventure were not merely about distance or solitude, but about connection, trust, and facing the unknown together. Beneath the endless sky and beside the flowing creek, two hearts had found each other, ready to face the wild frontier as partners, companions, and friends, bound by courage, respect, and enduring love.